The Vanguard Lifestrategy funds are one of the most popular fund ranges in the world, and it's quite easy to see why. They're an all-in-one fund that gives you exposure to almost every sector and market in the world. The amount of diversification in this one fund is incredible, but to actually have success with these funds you need to make sure that you're using them correctly, because there are lots of mistakes that can be made. So in this video I want to help you understand exactly how you should be using these funds so that you can get the results that you need. For those of you that don't know, Vanguard's Lifestrategy fund are a special set of funds that are designed to be a single portfolio fund. Now what that means is just by investing in this one single fund, you can get access to a globally diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds. And the idea behind that is that once you've picked this one fund, you don't actually need to invest in anything else. Now these funds come in various different risk ranges, so you need to pick one that's appropriate for you. But after that you don't need to do anything else other than invest consistently over the long term to see the benefits. Now there can be a few misconceptions about how these funds should be used, and some of these mistakes could end up costing you money. So this video is really about trying to set some of those right, and to make sure that you're doing everything that you can to get the most out of these funds. So first up is, when should I buy? Now this is a big question and can be difficult to answer. Now you might look to the markets to see if you can time it or read the financial news online, but this is the last thing that you should be doing, as you shouldn't be trying to time the market. It all comes down to a common sense approach, and it's dependent on your personal situation and whether you are in the right position to start investing. And I was the same before I started investing. So some of the questions that you need to ask yourself are the following: have I paid off all my high interest debt? Have I got an emergency fund that I'm comfortable with? And finally, do I have some spare cash that I'm willing to invest for 5 years or longer? Now if the answer to any of these three questions is yes, then it's probably a good time for you to start investing. It can be really hard to get your head around investing your hard-earned cash into the markets that you don't fully understand, but it's important to remember that over the long term investors will be compensated for the risk that they take, and if you're appropriately diversified with a global portfolio of stocks and bonds, which is exactly what you get with a Lifestrategy fund, then you will see the results the longer you remain invested in the markets. The main thing to do is just to get started if your personal situation permits. The key thing you want to look for is a globally diversified portfolio that gives you exposure to all sectors and markets. The good thing about this fund is that if one market or sector is doing poorly, it's okay because you're well diversified, reduces the risk. It could be a good idea just to test the waters and set up a direct debit to the platform, which will just get you into the mindset and to the habit of investing. This can be good especially in the first few months, as it can be stressful because you haven't done it before. So really you want to have a set it and forget it mentality when it comes to investing in well diversified funds and index funds. The second mistake to avoid is, when should I sell? And really the mindset you want to have is to buy and hold. The idea behind these funds is that you pick one fund and continue to invest in that fund for the long term, and that allows for compounding. There are other funds you can buy which are more complicated and need to be tweaked, but you don't have to do that when it comes to the index funds and the Lifestrategy fund in particular. These funds are perfect because they just let you have a set it and forget approach to investing. A question that does often come up is that I've been investing for a while and I want to sell and take a bit of those profits. Whilst you can do this, we need to remember that when we invest, it's using money that we've already decided that you want to invest in the future. You don't need this money right now because remember, this is money that you've set aside as mentioned before. Or maybe you think that the markets are just looking quite high right now and you think it's a good opportunity to sell and make some profit. Now there's only really two scenarios where you should ever sell a fund like this, but it's important to remember it has nothing to do with what's going on in the market. Now the first could be that you've reached your goal, and that could have been you've saved up enough money to buy that house, or maybe you've got to retirement and it's time to start creating income from your assets. But even then you're only going to be selling little bits over time as and when you need it. The second reason is that you no longer feel you're taking the right amount of risk. Maybe you feel like you're in a position where you can take more risk and you're looking to go from a 60-40 fund to maybe an 80-20 fund, or you're in the opposite position and you're closer to retirement and you're thinking it's time to dial it down. And even then you're not really selling out completely because you're simply selling one fund then buying the other. Now these decisions should only really be made in changes in your own personal circumstances, not by what's going on in the market, because you could do a few hours of research and decide which one of these funds you want to invest in, then set up a direct debit that comes out of your salary straight after you get paid each month. And the third one is whether you can mix the Lifestrategy fund with other funds found on Vanguard or other providers. This is something that you can do, but it's important to see both sides. The simplicity of the Lifestrategy fund removes a lot of the decision making. The really big selling point about these funds is that they are simple, and simple is a very good thing when it comes to investing. It's like a ready-made meal and all you need to do is buy it and not worry about the ingredients or how to make it. It's all there for you to pick up off the shelf. But at the same time I can see why people may want to add to their portfolio. As an example, let's say you decided to invest in the Lifestrategy 60-40 fund, so that's 60% equities and 40% bonds. And then for some other reason you had decided to invest in the 40-60 fund, so that's 40% equities and 60% bonds. Now if you invested 50% of your money in one fund and 50% in the other, this would give you an overall exposure of 50-50. Now this 50-50 exposure isn't something that's offered by Vanguard, which could be good if you want to keep things balanced. However, this could cause a few problems. Let's say we had again invested in that 60/40 fund, but instead we had found a global equity fund that we liked the look of, and then we wanted to invest in that as well. If we then invested 50% in one fund and 50% in the other, we need to consider that this is going to give us an overall exposure of 80/20. Now that's not too hard to understand, but the problem comes when these funds start to grow because they're unlikely to be growing at the same rates. Now let's say that the global equities fund had grown quicker than the 60/40 as you might expect, and then suddenly over time you end up with a very different portfolio that you had originally started out with. Now that's not a massive problem, but it does mean that you have to come back in and maybe make some adjustments or make some changes to your portfolio. The problem with that is that any decision that you make is ultimately just a chance to mess things up and maybe get things wrong. If you can try and keep the number of decisions that you need to make down to a minimum, you're going to do much better over the long term. So the idea here is that you want to ideally make it as simple as you possibly can. And as soon as you start throwing other funds into the mix, things can quickly get more complicated. That being said, there are some valid reasons why you might choose a life strategy fund as the core of your portfolio, but then also choosing to invest in a few other funds around the sides. And there's nothing wrong with doing this. You may want to do it to learn or to keep things exciting, but it's important to remember you need to have the correct mindset when doing this. So one reason could be that you're interested in investing in direct stocks or buying individual companies. Personally, I think that the index funds are the best way for people to invest in. However, you can set some money aside to invest in individual companies if you're interested to do that. Now, if I was to do that, I would be purely doing it out of curiosity, but I wouldn't have any expectations that it would outperform my other funds. Free platforms like Freetrade and Trading212 are perfect for this. And if you want to do that too, I would highly encourage you to do it in this manner, where you have the core of your portfolio, maybe 80 to 90% of your portfolio made up of either one index fund or potentially a life strategy fund, and then the other 10 to 20% invested in individual companies. Now, you've obviously got to consider that the other percentage is going to up the risk of your portfolio, and of course you're going to run into exactly the same problems that I've already demonstrated, where one side of your portfolio is performing better than the other. You have to make changes and ultimately more decisions, but at the same time, if you want to invest in direct equities, I think this is the best way to do that, to have the core of your portfolio of index funds and then really a bit of fund money, say 10, 20, 15% of your portfolio on the side that you're investing in individual companies. The second reason is that if you want to give yourself more exposure to individual sectors in the market, so let's say you wanted to invest into smaller companies or potentially the emerging markets or something like that. Now, there are legitimate reasons why you might want to do this and give yourself more exposure to those areas, but when doing this, it's important to think of both sides, because for most investors this is just adding far more complexity than you need, and you'd be throwing away the single best thing about these life strategy funds, the fact that there's just one of them and you only need to invest in one thing. So for most people, I really don't think it's worth messing around and adding anything else to these funds, unless you've really thought about it and you're willing to accept the drawbacks. That's it for today, and thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more, you may like to check out some of my other videos on investing and finance.